Hello and welcome to Bike Bros TV on YouTube. My name is Graham. I'm the owner of Bike Bros, a bike shop in Cochrane, Alberta, Canada, and today we're going to have a look at the Marin Headlands 2. So the Headlands 2 is the top model of a 2 Headlands model program with Marin. This guy here is $39.69 Canadian or $3,099 US dollars. And that price is as of early 2023. Who knows what's going to happen with prices this year. But anyways, the Headlands 2 is the top model in the Headlands lineup. There is also a Headlands 1, which I've done a video on before. It's a $33.69 Canadian or $25.99 USD bike. Today, we're looking at the Headlands 2 though. If the Headlands pricing seems a little bit steep for you, Marin also makes 2 different models, the Gestalt X10 and X11, and they are sort of the aluminum models below the Headlands that continue on much of the same theme. So basically, if getting into the 3 to 4 grand range on a carbon gravel bike isn't up your alley, then the Gestalt X will get you in there for the 2 to 3 grand sort of range. So just an idea. Specifications. So this Headlands 2 is a size 56 centimeter and it weighs 21.2 pounds. That is an actual measured weight. That's pretty impressive considering it does have some extra features added to it that the Headlands 1 doesn't have, yet it is still lighter than the Headlands 1. So let's take a look at some of those features. Drivetrain on this Headlands 2 features a Shimano GRX 812 rear derailleur. So this is basically the gravel version of an Ultegra level rear derailleur. It is a shadow rear derailleur, meaning that we don't have basically a pivot happening right here. This is a little bit more low profile, and that is designed with a couple things in mind. One being that it's not going to catch on things as easily, and it also ends up providing a stiffer derailleur that tends to work really well with 1x drivetrains. Part of that GRX drivetrain is also having a clutch on here. So a clutch basically is giving us a really pronounced spring tension in the rear derailleur. I just turned that off, and you can see that it kind of moves fairly easily going forward. When it's in the on position, there is a really strong spring in here. The idea there is that a really strong spring is going to help keep chain tension and work really well with a 1x drivetrain with narrow wide teeth on the front, as opposed to if you have tons of spring tension there and also trying to get a front derailleur going on the same time, you're sort of battling a little bit of extra tension by trying to use a front derailleur. So this is ideally suited to a 1x drivetrain. So GRX 1x. The reason they actually give you that on-off switch, that's largely so that you can actually take your rear wheel off without battling all of that extra tension from the clutch being on. The cassette on here is a Shimano CSM 8000, which is actually a Shimano XT level cassette, and it's got from 11 to 42 teeth on it. So a pretty good range of gears, 11 speeds, XT level, which is a really nice thing to see because you quite often see complete bikes. One of the places that brands tried to hide sort of downgrades is often in a cassette. So to actually see a very good level cassette on here is a really good sign. This is of course a carbon frame. We're looking at a Thru-Axle. So that Thru-Axle is just going to give you a little bit more strength in how the rear wheel is attached to the frame as compared to a quick release lever. We also see above that axle, that is a threaded insert hole, and that is going to make things like fenders, or if you're going to kick it old school and put a pannier rack on there, a little bit easier to mount. Going together with that, that is a removable arch at your seat stay. You would remove it just to give yourself a little bit of a cleaner look and save a hair's worth of weight. But it is nice that they're giving you something like that. You can take it off. It's got a threaded hole on the back. That is going to make fender mounting easy. And even on the frame itself, that little thing sticking out, that is going to make rack mounting that much easier. So even though it's a carbon frame, they are giving you some allowance for attaching fenders and or racks on the back, which is a somewhat rare feature, I would say. A lot of cases see carbon frames and they really try to minimize what you can load on the bikes for the sake of fragility of some really light carbon frames. The rims on this bike are tubeless compatible, 21 millimeters wide and 21 millimeters tall. And they're also a eyeletted nipple hole there. So that little brass thing around where the nipple goes in the rim just allows for a little bit nicer wheel build and helps to spread the load of the back of that nipple on the rim, which just, it's a sign of rim quality. And honestly, it's not something you often see on a bike that, while this is a high quality bike, it's also trying to it basically is standing out as a really good value bike within this sort of category. So nice to see those sort of details. Being tubeless ready means that it's already taped. The rim profile is set up to go tubeless, but the factory setup is with a standard tube inside this tire. The tire is a 700 by 44 WTB byway 44, so that 44 goes with the 44C tire size. As you can see, it is a tread pattern that is giving you a really nice smooth sort of center ridge and then a little bit of extra bite on the outer edges. So if you do happen to get into looser gravel or onto some single track, you've got that extra bite where you need it. I've personally got this bike and I find this to be a really, really nice riding tire. It feels extremely fast on road, very road bike-ish, yet I've also ridden it on single track and stuff like that. Tire seems to perform pretty well. It will let loose pretty easily if you're trying to brake really hard because of that center ridge being so smooth, but I would say it's a really nice balance of capability in both on and off-road situations. So matched up with our drivetrain in the back there, we have FSA Gossamer Pro cranks on here, and that is with a 42 tooth and, as I mentioned, narrow wide chainring on there. That is also attached to the bike via a threaded bottom bracket. So for anybody that likes to do maintenance at home, a threaded bottom bracket at least means that you can pop out the bearings, clean things out without having to basically replace one of the press fit style bottom brackets that are pretty popular, especially in the gravel sort of category. So looking at the frame again, we see a whole bunch of attachments for bags, whether they be bento box style bags that you would put up here, internal frame bags, water bottles. You get a pile of freedom for mounting things on this bike. So I personally have a water bottle cage here, one here, and then I use this section up here to put extra CO2, but I mean, you really do have piles of options for how you can use all these mounts. The one thing I would say is these top mounts here, if you're not going to mount a bento bag on there, that's a pretty vulnerable position for if you happen to have a misfortune of sliding off in some gnarly stuff and your crotch sliding across there. I'd personally remove those, and there are little rubber plugs that are available at lots of bike shops that you can just put in there, which will give you a nice smoother surface, not something that's going to rip an important part of your body off. Another part of this is just looking at this profile on the seat tube. So the idea with this is they're trying to get as short a rear end as possible while still having really ample tire clearance. This is one thing that makes this bike one by specific though. There is no accommodation for mounting a front derailleur, either with a direct mount or with a band style clamp. So just keep in mind, this is a one by only bike. On the subject of it being one by only, it's one thing that I personally see as a huge positive. I love one by on a gravel bike. There are shortcomings compared to some of the newest 2x drivetrains as far as not having as broad a range of gears. I've ridden anything from my usual old road loops and ridden some pretty steep single track stuff. And I have found that if I had lower gearing than what was on here in the off-road segments, I would probably be spinning out because there'd just be too much torque. And in a road situation, for what I give up in sort of maximum speed before I top out, I think the benefits of this one by system far outweigh the shortcoming. That is my personal thing. This is going to be something where if you come from a road background, it may be very important to you to have a very specific cadence that you're going to follow. For me, the upside of one by is not having frustration with front shifting, which I will admit to having a lot of in my road riding days. And also just it's extremely quiet, not having a front derailleur, and you are less likely to knock a chain off of a narrow wide one by front ring because the chain ring only has to do one job, and that's hold the chain on. Where if you have a 2x drivetrain on the front there, the chainring is basically designed to do two things, and they're contrary to each other. One is trying to keep the chain on, and the other is allowing it to shift smoothly. So those two things are very opposed in what they do for you. Moving up, we then get to one of the features of this Headland 2, and that is this Trans-X dropper post. It is internally rooted. Cable goes into the frame there, goes down, comes back up into the bottom of your post. The amount of drop that you get on your dropper will vary depending on frame size. As I mentioned, this is a 56 centimeter frame, and it comes with the longer of the two dropper sizes. It's 105 millimeters of drop on this size and any larger frames. Once you're down to 54 centimeters, you'll go down to 70 millimeters of drop. There are still some people unsure about if you would need a dropper on a gravel bike, and my answer is yep, got one, love it, use it a lot. If for nothing else, if you end up using a bike like this to commute or anything like that, just even when you stop at lights to be able to just drop your seat, it is a super surprising upside, and except for this tiny weight penalty, I don't see a downside of having a dropper post on a bike like this. Along with that dropper post, this is a brand new saddle on the 2023 version of this bike, a new Marin road saddle, and it has proven to be pretty darn comfortable. It's kind of following the newest trends, which is shortening up the nose and just this general shape. And I would go as far as saying, yeah, I was really happy with it when I was still getting to ride this outdoors. Once I put my personal Headlands on a trainer, that was the first time I found the limits of that saddle. Anybody who spent time on a trainer knows that trainer time is like 3 times the equivalent of actual outdoor time in a seat's ability to make your butt really hurt. So for a stock saddle, good saddle. Moving ahead on the bike here, we see a relatively long head tube on the frame. A nice short Marin stem. This is a 70 millimeter long stem on this 56 centimeter. And I would say that is one of the spots, we'll talk about sizing in a bit, but depending on if you're coming from mountain or road background, you might be keeping that the same length or potentially even shortening that stem in some cases. Handlebars, this is one of the cases where we see a functional difference between I think what they're imagining the Headlands 1 and the Headlands 2, what it's going to be designed to do and who it's designed for. This is quite a bit wider bar with quite a bit more flair on it than on the Headlands 1. That combined with that dropper post, I think that just leads to this level of the bike being designed for that much more than just sticking to gravel. This really does invite you to spend some time off-road. To give you an idea on these bars, they are 47 centimeters wide from the center of the one hood to the next. They are 53 centimeters wide from the tip of the drop to the tip of the drop. And then you have 13 centimeters of drop, so that vertical distance there. So it's a relatively compact bar as far as drop, a wide bar, not very much in the way of forward reach from where your kind of curl starts to where your hood starts, so a very short reach. So this is all stuff to me that it fits with the contemporary idea of what a gravel bar is, and that also fits with the modern idea of a gravel bike being a bike that is designed for more than just gravel. Looking at the fork, we have very, very generous tire clearance here. So as much as this bike is designed to go up to a 45C tire on a 700 or a 47 in a 650B, on your back you do maybe have limitations that those become realistic tire sizes. I think that you could go a touch bigger with your front tire if you wanted, and the person who would want to do that is really somebody who is pushing this well beyond its limits and kind of going after the mountain theory of a bigger, more treaded tire on the front for hard descending cornering. The theme of all of the nubbins to hold on to things continues onto the forks. This is a new fork for 2023. My old 2020 version of this bike only had 2 mounts here. So giving you the 3, I think this opens up the doors to a few more aftermarket anything cage style cages that you can attach water or stuff to your forks. So this is a gravel bike that is also, I would say, a light bike packing bike. So this could be a very different bike to many people. Once again, below the front 12mm Thru-Axle, we have a threaded insert down there. That combined with, can you see underneath there? It's on the front there. Threading on the front of the fork. So between those two things, you do have some allowance to get a fender on here as well. So lots of room. Thru-Axle, threaded bosses, another one there. Going on to the brakes on this bike, these are GRX 800 series brakes. So the one thing with them is that they're going to be a servo wave levered brake driving these brakes, and that is going to make for a little bit more powerful brake than on the Headlands 1. Once again, leading us to think this bike is built for pretty aggressive riding. Rotors front and rear are 160mm 6-bolt pattern. So that is as common a rotor as you can get. If you ever happen to ding one, you need to replace it. It's also nice to see a 160mm rotor compared to a lot of gravel bikes taking road inspiration and using 140mm rotors. I'll just give you an idea of what that internal cable routing looks like. It comes out of a pretty nicely designed little port down there. This is just a little rubber grommet where cables go inside the frame. Once again, I'll look at that removable seat stay arch. And coming back to that flat mount rear GRX brake. So one of the nice things on here is because this bike is spec'd as a dropper equipped bike, we have shifting happening on this side here. So that is your shifter. You're either moving the entire lever over or this little back portion. Easier gear, harder gear. The other side, the nice thing that we see is incorporating the fact that these are designed to move is this is then your dropper activation is your what would usually be your front shifter thing. So once again, that's a thing that because we don't have a front derailleur down here, this shifter can turn into a dropper post activating thing. And we'll finish off the specs by just coming in and looking at the bare head badge on this thing. So that is a rundown on the specs on this, and I'm actually going to go back and also show you this, because one of my favorite things, being a personal owner of one of these bikes, is the really nice diamond fade from a beautiful red into this what looks like black but is actually just clear coat over the unidirectional carbon fiber sheets that are inside the frame. So let's move on to discussing something else. So who does this suit? Well, the common thing you'll see when a lot of people discuss this bike is that this is the mountain biker's gravel bike. I'd agree with that, except I think that basically tries to pigeonhole this bike too much. I think this is a bike that could be anything from a really fancy commuter bike for a bike geek who really gets off on just having a super rad bike underneath them. It could be that, obviously, the mountain biker's gravel bike. It isn't a super extreme geometry or anything, so this really could be the everything bike for somebody. This could be anything from, I would say, a fondo, like the person who wants a gravel bike but also wants to do a road fondo, to doing a gravel fondo, to somebody who wants to do light bike packing, touring type thing, commuter bike. In our town where we're from, I would say this really would suit somebody who is a mountain biker, who our trails, for the most part, the exciting trails are about an hour away by car. So for lots of people around here, they find themselves wanting to go out for a quick rip when they get home from work in the evening. There isn't enough time to drive to a trailhead, get a good ride in, and then get home. This means that you get home, chuck your stuff on. You don't need to wear Lycra because it's a gravel bike. You just throw on your clothes, head out for an hour or two, and let your mood take you wherever you need to go. That could be a fully paved route. It could be pavement that leads to gravel, it leads to single track, all single track, whatever. That's kind of what this bike does for you, is it just leaves the door open, gets you onto a bike that rides really, really beautifully. It's smooth, it's quiet, it's comfortable. It is also as aggressive as you want it to be. You would have room to basically adjust fit to suit more of a mountain biker with a shorter stem or more of a road rider. It really is just your other bike in the garage if you're a mountain biker, or your do-it-all bike if you just are a bike geek and love having drop handlebars. So that, I would say, is who this suits. If you love bikes, you need to have something like this in your stable. Negatives. This one I really had to rack my brain around, and I could only come up with two things after thinking about this for a while. And they're both, well, kind of spec things. The one would be this chain. It is a KMC X11, and people have different opinions on chains and what's good, what isn't. There are people out there who would say that they would much prefer to see a Shimano branded chain on there. Having ridden my personal bike for a while, guess what? My KMC X11 is still on there, so it's not a big enough deal that I have switched it out. The other thing I would say is these handlebars. And the only thing I would say about that is the profile of these bars. This remains round all the way around here. I am a fan of winged bars, and so that usually means a little bit of a flatter profile on the tops here. It just makes it that much more comfortable if you're going for a really long ride. If you do need to sit up and you're going to be kind of riding with your hands up top here, that aero bar, winged bar type thing is just a bit more comfortable. And guess what? I still have these bars on my bike too, so it's not that big of a concern that I have switched those out. That is quite literally all I can think about on this bike that from the original specifications I would change. Positives. Well, I bought one of these bikes and I can say from personal experience, one of the biggest positives to me is I absolutely love the color, the way the graphics are done on here. It is just a great looking bike. It rides phenomenally, and as much as looking at a price tag like $39.69 Canadian price isn't cheap, this is a heck of a bargain for the level of quality. And that is the level of quality of your spec, the frame quality, the ride quality, all those things. You look at the other big players in this sort of category, your Specialized, Trek, Norco, that sort of stuff. You're just not getting that combination of GRX 800 series, drivetrain, brakes, dropper, aesthetics, carbon frame, well thought out bar width, nice saddle that doesn't need to be switched, tires that are a super nice tire right out of the box. This is one of the closest to a 10 out of 10 bikes I think that I have sort of seen in the last few years. So the positives are the bike is freaking awesome. Upgrades. I can only think of one thing, and that revolves around that thing. I would go tubeless. Out of the box, that is the only shortcoming. So it's not really an upgrade, it is just taking advantage of what they have made this bike capable of. By going tubeless, you'll be able to ride your tires that little bit softer without worrying about pinch flats, which is, if you're going to ride the bike off of pavement, is going to give you higher performance. If you're going to spend most of your time on pavement, it's not even a thing that I would really waste my time with. You can still ride your tires plenty soft on this to have a super comfortable road ride, but if you're getting into a little bit more lumpy, bumpy terrain, going tubeless is your one and only thing that I can think of to upgrade this beautiful bike. Sizing is a pretty complex thing to try and cover in a few minutes, so here are just a few thoughts on this bike. For a given size like this, being a 56, in many cases you're seeing companies that aren't taking a holistic approach to stem length and reach of the frame. Marin is taking that into account, so if you're coming from a road world, you can probably stick with the sizing that you're used to and still end up with a reach that is going to not feel too compact for you. If you're on the border between sizes, I would personally say size down, or if you're a mountain biker, I would consider sizing down. What I'm thinking in this case is that a gravel bike is as much about getting the ergonomics of power like a road bike. It is trying to balance that with the fact that you're now going to try and handle this bike in terrain that is not just pavement. So you need to have a bit more comfortable position on the bike and have the bike a little bit more underneath you rather than stretched out in front of you. So for myself, I went with a 58. I'm 6'1" and a bit, and I still contemplate the idea that I should have gone with a 56 fairly often, and if nothing else, I may be shortening from my 70mm stem to a 60mm stem. So that is my only tip on sizing. Get some assistance from us if you happen to be in the area, or from your local shop. But make sure that if they're kind of a real road-based shop, that you aren't just getting numbers off of their kind of, this is a perfect road fit. On gravel bikes, especially as they become more capable, we need to start thinking a little bit more about bike handling and your comfort, not just the ergonomics of aerodynamics and power generation. So those are my very brief thoughts on sizing. My summary on the Marin Headlands 2 of 2023. If you can't tell so far, I am in love with this bike. So this is about as biased as I will ever get. My Headlands 2 is the second Headlands 2 I've had. I had the previous generation, which shared the same frame. To this new model, they widened the bars, made the tires bigger, and what else did they do? Changed the color. And those things are all things that I absolutely love on this new bike. The wider bars make the bike handle that much better in any kind of non-pavement situation. It also gives you tons of torque for out of the saddle climbing. So this is just an awesome bike. I would say it suits somebody who is a big enough bike geek that spending about $4 on a bike doesn't break the bank. They can just appreciate all the things that make this something that really gets you excited to get on the bike. If you like the concept of this bike, but don't have anything like that budget, I would seriously recommend looking at the Marin Gestalt X 11, because that brings you basically the features of this bike with an aluminum frame for a much more affordable price. If you like the concept of looking down at a beautiful smooth carbon bike, but you don't plan on being an idiot on your bike, look at this, the Headlands 1. Or if you like the concepts of everything we've talked about between Headlands 2, Headlands 1, and your budget is that much lower again, consider the Marin Gestalt X10. I think between these bikes you have a pretty awesome way to get into gravel bike that is going to give you really, really good feedback. Between the Gestalt X10 and this Headlands 2, you can basically go from a $2,000 to a $4,000 bike, and you're going to be thrilled, and it's going to do a gravel bike justice for putting a big smile on your face and getting you to get outside that much more. So I'm a fan. When a bike shop owner buys the same bike, 2 bikes in a row, it says something about that bike, and it says Graham loves the Headlands. If you like this sort of information about bikes, consider subscribing to the Bike Bros YouTube channel, and then we can see you again in a future video. Talk to you later.